Hello, my name's Robert Jones, and today I'll be talking about a chapter from my book, The Top 25 Biggest Misconceptions About Christianity. So number 10 from that book is A Married Jesus. I heard that Jesus was married and had children. Doesn't this mean that he was just a man? So where did this whole idea come from? Well, the whole thing comes from a book that was published in 1982 called Holy Blood, Holy Grail. It was written by Michael Bagent, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln. And the premise of this book was that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were married and had children, and that a secret bloodline exists through their descendants, and that somehow we could trace that bloodline all the way down to today. Now, the book was supposedly nonfiction, and it discusses historical facts and people and events, including the Crusades, Leonardo da Vinci, the Knights Templar, Bernard of Clairvaux. And it mixes that true stuff with a completely spurious and wild claim that Jesus and Mary were married and had a bloodline. Now, even though there's lots of facts mixed in there about those things we already mentioned, Da Vinci and Bernard of Clairvaux and whatnot, there are actually no facts whatsoever to back up the Jesus being married claim. It's actually totally speculative. To kind of prove my point, the actual authors had a foreword in the book, and they admitted that it was total speculation. They said then, too, we were chastised for having speculated. We readily admitted it. We had produced a hypothesis, and hypotheses must necessarily rest on speculation. Of course, we could not prove our conclusions. Now, what they could do is write a spurious book that cast aspersions on the core doctrines of Christianity with no proof whatsoever, and that's what they did do. Henry Lincoln, one of the three authors, disavowed the book years ago, and the book had started to fade into oblivion until Dan Brown came along with the Da Vinci Code, and it sort of revived the whole topic, was Jesus married, because of both the book and the movie. And before one says, well, wait a second, that's just a novel, it's just a movie, why are we getting so upset about it? I actually saw an interview with Dan Brown, and he said that he believed the Jesus and Mary bloodline story, that he didn't view it as simply fiction or something you would put in a novel. Matter of fact, on his website, he said, rumors of this conspiracy have been whispered for centuries in countless languages, including the languages of art, music, and literature. Some of the most dramatic evidence can be found in the paintings of Leonardo da Vinci, which seem to overflow with mystifying symbolism, anomalies, and codes. Art historians agree that da Vinci's paintings contain hidden levels of meaning that go well beneath the surface of the paint. Many scholars believe this work intentionally provides clues to a powerful secret, a secret that remains protected to this day by a clandestine brotherhood of which Da Vinci was a member. Sounds pretty exciting and shocking, doesn't it? Of course, there wasn't really any proof. And while I won't argue the idea that there are secret symbols, mystifying symbolism in some of Da Vinci's paintings and other works, it's quite possible that they had to do with things other than protecting the bloodline of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. For example, a more modern view is that Da Vinci might have been a secret Protestant. And actually that makes a whole lot more sense than that he was head of some shadowy organization that had existed for 1400 years up to that point to protect the bloodline of Jesus and Mary. So where does this concept come from? Is there any proof whatsoever that Jesus was married? There's a group of Gospels called the Gnostic Gospels, and a lot of them were dug up at Nag Hammadi, I think it was 1947 or 1948. Interesting, they were found just about the same time as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Well, anyway, these Gnostic Gospels were dug up in the Egyptian desert. And I guess we should talk just a moment about what Gnosticism is. Gnosticism is a different religion than Christianity, but it claims to be Christian. So therefore, by definition, it can be pretty dangerous. Some of the major tenets of Gnosticism are a lot like some modern-day Eastern religions. They believed in docetism, believed that Jesus wasn't a flesh and blood human being, rather he was a spirit who had come to earth. Therefore, he could not have been crucified, he could not have been raised from the dead, because he was never a flesh and blood human. They also believed in dualism, which is a view that there are two kind of equal forces, two gods in the universe. There's a good God and a bad God, and they're constantly fighting together. So anyway, among these Gospels, there was one that's called the Gospel of Mary, another one called the Gospel of Philip. And this is where they get their text. Now I'm going to read it 2 times. The first time I'm going to read it where they fill in the holes in the text, because a lot of time with ancient documents there will be holes in the manuscript and you won't know what was supposed to be there. So the first time I will read it with the translator's view of what should have been in the hole. For he knew her completely and loved her devotedly. Okay, that one's not too controversial in terms of making an assumption of what is in the hole in the document. The only word added is and. He loved her completely and loved her devotedly. Here's the one that is much more troublesome if you're trying to make a case for the married Jesus. So again, the first time I'm going to read it, it's going to be with the extra text added in by the translator. And the consort of the Christ is Miriam the Magdalene. The Lord loved Miriam more than all the other disciples, and he kissed her often on her mouth. Well, gosh, that sounds pretty conclusive, doesn't it? So even though this is a Gnostic gospel, which isn't part of the Bible and has never been accepted by any major Christian organization as being inspired by God, well, this would seem to indicate that there was some special relationship between Jesus and Mary, and my God, they kissed on the mouth. Okay, now we'll try it this time by taking the words out that were added in by the translator. And the consort of the blank, so we don't even know who we're talking about, is Miriam the Magdalene. The blank, Miriam more than blank, blank, blank disciples, so we don't even know who loved Miriam more than the other disciples. And blank kissed her often on her blank. So this is usually the text that's used to prove conclusively that Jesus and Mary must have been married, and you can see that it is all based on supposition and all based on what the translator decides to add into the text at the places where there are missing words because of holes in the manuscript. But could Jesus have been married? Could he have had children? Would this have questioned his divinity if it could have been proven? Well, that's a question scholars have been asking for hundreds of years. From a theological standpoint, Jesus was fully God and fully man. I think there's a hymn that says that. When he became incarnate, he took all of the characteristics of a man. That's what becoming incarnate means. So assumedly, if he hit his thumb with a hammer, it hurt. If he cut himself, he bled real blood. He probably needed to use the rest facilities like the rest of us, because again, fully man. So theoretically, he could have been married and even had children as part of the fully man part of his being. If that had been the case, it would not have affected his divinity, the fully God part of his essence. As a matter of fact, some scholars have suggested, since he was a typical Jewish man of the time, a 30-year-old Jewish man probably would have been married and probably would have had a family. So it's not that there's anything theologically against the idea of Jesus having been married. The problem is there is no canonical, historical, or even apocryphal evidence to suggest that it was the case. And there's certainly no evidence to support the idea that there was some sort of bloodline that's carried down through the centuries. So thank you for listening to a discussion about Chapter 10 of my book, and we'll have another one of these soon.